In all literature, you will not find a better description of leadership than this. Apply it to yourself, or to your business, or to your profession, or to the place where you are employed, and you will observe how well it serves as your guide. Major box address is one that might well be delivered to every boy and girl who graduates in high school. It might well be delivered to every college graduate. It might well become the book of rules for every man who is placed in a position of leadership over other men, no matter in what calling, business, or profession. In Lesson 2, you learn the value of a definite chief aim. Let it be here emphasized that your aim must be active and not passive. A definite aim will never be anything else but a mere wish unless you become a person of initiative and aggressively and persistently pursue that aim until it has been fulfilled. You can get nowhere without persistence, a fact which cannot be too often repeated. The difference between persistence and lack of it is the same as the difference between wishing for a thing and positively determining to get it. To become a person of initiative, you must form the habit of aggressively and persistently following the object of your definite chief aim until you acquire it, whether this requires 1 year or 20 years. You might as well have no definite chief aim as to have such an aim without continuous effort to achieve it. You are not making the most of this course if you do not take some step each day that brings you nearer realization of your definite chief aim. Do not fool yourself or permit yourself to be misled to believe that the object of your definite chief aim will matter alive if you only wait. The materialization will come through your own determination, backed by your own carefully laid plans and your own initiative in putting those plans into action, or it will not come at all. One of the major requisites for leadership is the power of quick and firm decision. Analysis of more than 16,000 people disclosed the fact that leaders are always men of ready decision, even in matters of small importance, while the follower is never a person of quick decision. This is worth remembering. The follower, in whatever walk of life you find him, is a man who seldom knows what he wants. He vacillates, procrastinates, and actually refuses to reach a decision, even in matters of the smallest importance, unless a leader induces him to do so. To know that the majority of people cannot and will not reach decisions quickly, if at all, is of great help to the leader who knows what he wants and has a plan for getting it. Here it will be observed how closely allied are the two laws covered by Lesson 2 in this lesson. The leader not only works with a definite chief aim, but he has a very definite plan for attaining the object of that aim. It will be seen, also, that the law of self-confidence becomes an important part of the working equipment of the leader. The chief reason why the follower does not reach decisions is that he lacks the self-confidence to do so. Every leader makes use of the law of a definite purpose, the law of self-confidence, and the law of initiative and leadership. And if he is an outstanding, successful leader, he makes use, also, of the laws of imagination, enthusiasm, self-control, pleasing personality, accurate thinking, concentration, and tolerance. Without the combined use of all these laws, no one may become a really great leader. Omission of a single one of these laws lessens the power of the leader proportionately. A salesman for the LaSalle Extension University called on a real estate dealer in a small western town for the purpose of trying to sell the real estate man a course in salesmanship and business management. When the salesman arrived at the prospective student's office, he found the gentleman pecking out a letter by the two-finger method on an antiquated typewriter. The salesman introduced himself, then proceeded to state his business and describe the course he had come to sell. The real estate man listened with apparent interest. After the sales talk had been completed, the salesman hesitated, waiting for some signs of yes or no from his prospective client. Thinking that perhaps he had not made the sales talk quite strong enough, he briefly went over the merits of the course he was selling a second time. Still, there was no response from the prospective student. The salesman then asked the direct question, "You want this course, do you not?" In a slow, drawling tone of voice, the real estate man replied, "Well, I hardly know whether I do or not." No doubt he was telling the truth, because he was one of the millions of men who find it hard to reach decisions. Being an able judge of human nature, the salesman then arose, put on his hat, placed his literature back in his briefcase, and made ready to leave. Then he resorted to tactics which were somewhat drastic, and took the real estate man by surprise with this startling statement. "I am going to take it upon myself to say something to you that you will not like, but it may be of help to you. Take a look at this office in which you work. When the floor is dirty, the walls are dusty, the typewriter you are using looks as if it might be the one Mr. Noah used in the Ark during the big flood. Your pants are bagged at the knees, your collar is dirty, your face is unshaved, and you have a look in your eyes that tells me you are defeated. Please go ahead and get mad. That's just what I want you to do. because it may shock you into doing some thinking that will be helpful to you and to those who are dependent upon you. I can see, in my imagination, the home in which you live. Several little children, none too well dressed, and perhaps none too well fed. A mother whose dress is 3 seasons out of style, whose eyes carry the same look of defeat that yours do. This little woman whom you married has stuck by you, but you have not made good in life as she had hoped, when you were first married, that you would. Please remember that I am not now talking to a prospective student, because I would not sell you this course at this particular moment if you offered to pay cash in advance, because if I did you would not have the initiative to complete it. And we want no failures on our student list. The talk I am now giving you will make it impossible, perhaps, for me ever to sell you anything, but it is going to do something for you that has never been done before, providing it makes you think. Now, I will tell you in a very few words exactly why you are defeated, why you are pecking out letters on an old typewriter, in an old dirty office, in a little town. It is because you do not have the power to reach a decision. All your life you have been forming the habit of dodging the responsibility of reaching decisions until you have come, now, to where it is well nigh impossible for you to do so. If you had told me that you wanted the course, or that you did not want it, I could have sympathized with you, because I would have known that lack of funds was what caused you to hesitate. But what did you say? Why, you admitted you did not know whether you wanted it or not. If you will think over what I have said, I am sure you will acknowledge that it has become a habit with you to dodge the responsibility of reaching clear-cut decisions on practically all matters that affect you. The real estate man sat glued in his chair, with his underjaw dropped, his eyes bulged in astonishment, but he made no attempt to answer the biting indictment. The salesman said goodbye and started for the door. After he had closed the door behind him, he again opened it, walked back in, with a smile on his face, took his seat in front of the astonished real estate man, and explained his conduct in this way. I do not blame you at all if you feel hurt at my remarks. In fact, I sort of hope that you have been offended, but now let me say this, man to man, that I think you have intelligence and I am sure you have ability, but you have fallen into a habit that has whipped you. No man is ever down and out until he is under the sod. You may be temporarily down, but you can get up again, and I am just sportsman enough to give you my hand and offer you a lift, if you will accept my apologies for what I have said. You do not belong in this town. You would starve to death in the real estate business in this place, even if you were a leader in your field. Get yourself a new suit of clothes, even if you have to borrow the money with which to do it. Then go over to St. Louis with me and I will introduce you to a real estate man who will give you a chance to earn some money and at the same time teach you some of the important things about this line of work that you can capitalize later on. If you haven't enough credit to get the clothes you need, I will stand good for you at a store in St. Louis where I have a charge account. I am in earnest, and my offer to help you is based upon the highest motive that can actuate a human being. I am successful in my own field, but I have not always been so. I went through just what you are now going through, but the important thing is that I went through it and got it over with, just as you are going to do if you will follow my advice. Will you come with me? The real estate man started to arise, but his legs wobbled and he sank back into his chair. Despite the fact that he was a great big fellow, with rather pronounced manly qualities, known as the He-Man type, his emotions got the better of him, and he actually wept. He made a second attempt and got on his feet, shook hands with the salesman, thanked him for his kindness, and said he was going to follow the advice, but he would do so in his own way. Calling for an application blank, he signed for the course on salesmanship and business management, made the first payment in nickels and dimes, and told the salesman he would hear from him again. 3 years later, this real estate man had an organization of 60 salesmen and one of the most successful real estate businesses in the city of St. Louis. The author of this course, who was advertising manager of the LaSalle Extension University at the time this incident happened, has been in this real estate man's office many times and has observed him over a period of more than 15 years. He is an entirely different man from the person interviewed by the LaSalle salesman over 15 years ago. And the thing that made him different is the same that will make you different. It is the power of decision which is so essential to leadership. This real estate man is now a leader in the real estate field. He is directing the efforts of other salesmen and helping them to become more efficient. This one change in his philosophy has turned temporary defeat into success. Every new salesman who goes to work for this man is called into his private office before he is employed and told the story of his own transformation. Word for word, just as it occurred when the LaSalle salesman first met him in his shabby little real estate office. Some 18 years ago, the author of this course made his first trip to the little town of Lumberport, West Virginia. At that time, the only means of transportation leading from Clarksburg, the largest nearby center, to Lumberport was the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad and an interurban electric line which ran within 3 miles of the town. One could walk the 3 miles if you chose. Upon arrival at Clarksburg, I found that the only train going to Lumberport in the forenoon had already gone, and not wishing to wait for the later afternoon train, I made the trip by trolley, with the intention of walking the 3 miles. On the way down, the rain began to pour, and those 3 miles had to be navigated on foot, through deep yellow mud. When I arrived at Lumberport, my shoes and pants were muddy, and my disposition was none the better for the experience. The first person I met was V.L. Horner, who was then cashier of the Lumberport Bank. In a rather loud tone of voice, I asked of him, "Why do you not get that trolley line extended from the junction over to Lumberport so your friends can get in and out of town without drowning in mud? Did you see a river with high banks at the edge of the town as you came in?" he asked. I replied that I had seen it. "Well," he continued, "that's the reason we have no streetcars running into town. The cost of a bridge would be about $100,000, and that is more than the company owning the trolley line is willing to invest. We have been trying for 10 years to get them to build a line into town." "Trying?" I exploded. "How hard have you tried?" "We have offered them every inducement we could afford, such as free right-of-way from the junction into the town and free use of the streets, but that bridge is the stumbling block. They simply will not stand the expense. Claim they cannot afford such an expense for the small amount of revenue they would receive from the 3-mile extension." Then the law of success philosophy began to come to my rescue. I asked Mr. Horner if he would take a walk over to the river with me, that we might look at the spot that was causing so much inconvenience. He said he would be glad to do so. When we got to the river, I began to take inventory of everything in sight. I observed that the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad tracks ran up and down the river banks on both sides of the river, that the county road crossed the river on a rickety wooden bridge, both approaches to which were over several strands of railroad track, as the railroad company had its switching yards at that point. While we were standing there, a freight train blocked the crossing and several teams stopped on both sides of the train, waiting for an opportunity to get through. The train kept the road blocked for about 25 minutes. With this combination of circumstances in mind, it required but little imagination to see that 3 different parties were or could be interested in the building of the bridge, such as would be needed to carry the weight of a streetcar. It was obvious that the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company would be interested in such a bridge, because that would remove the county road from their switching tracks and save them a possible accident on the crossing, to say nothing of much loss of time and expense in cutting trains to allow teams to pass. It was also obvious that the county commissioners would be interested in the bridge, because it would raise the county road to a better level and make it more serviceable to the public. And, of course, the street railway company was interested in the bridge, but IT did not wish to pay the entire cost. All these facts passed through my mind as I stood there and watched the freight train being cut for the traffic to pass through. A definite chief aim took place in my mind. Also, a definite plan for its attainment. The next day, I got together a committee of townspeople, consisting of the mayor, councilmen, and some leading citizens, and called on the division superintendent of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company at Grafton. We convinced him that it was worth 1/3 of the cost of the bridge to get the county road off his company's tracks. Next, we went to the county commissioners and found them to be quite enthusiastic over the possibility of getting a new bridge by paying for only 1/3 of it. They promised to pay their 1/3 providing we could arrange for the other 2/3. We then went to the president of the traction company that owned the trolley line at Fairmont and laid before him an offer to donate all the rights of way and pay for 2/3 of the cost of the bridge providing he would begin building the line into town promptly. We found him receptive also. 3 weeks later, a contract had been signed between the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company, the Monongahela Valley Traction Company, and the county commissioners of Harrison County, providing for the construction of the bridge. 1/3 of its cost to be paid by each. 2 months later, the right-of-way was being graded and the bridge was underway, and 3 months after that, streetcars were running into Lumberport on regular schedule. This incident meant much to the town of Lumberport, because it provided transportation that enabled people to get in and out of the town without undue effort. It also meant a great deal to me, because it served to introduce me as one who got things done. 2 very definite advantages resulted from this transaction. The chief counsel for the traction company gave me a position as his assistant, and later on it was the means of an introduction which led to my appointment as the advertising manager of the LaSalle Extension University. Lumberport, West Virginia, was then, and still is a small town, and Chicago was a large city and located a considerable distance away, but news of initiative and leadership has a way of taking on wings and traveling. 4 of the 15 laws of success were combined in the transaction described, namely, a definite chief aim, self-confidence, imagination, and initiative and leadership. The law of doing more than paid for also entered, somewhat, into the transaction, because I was not offered anything and in fact did not expect pay for what I did. To be perfectly frank, I appointed myself to the job of getting the bridge built more as a sort of challenge to those who said it could not be done than I did with the expectation of getting paid for it. By my attitude, I rather intimated to Mr. Horner that I could get the job done, and he was not slow to snap me up and put me to the test. It may be helpful to call attention here to the part which imagination played in this transaction. For 10 years, the townspeople of Lumberport had been trying to get a streetcar line built into town. It must not be concluded that the town was without men of ability, because that would be inaccurate. In fact, there were many men of ability in the town, but they had been making the mistake which is so commonly made by us all, of trying to solve their problem through one single source, whereas there were actually 3 sources of solution available to them. $100,000 was too much for one company to assume for the construction of a bridge, but when the cost was distributed between 3 interested parties, the amount to be borne by each was more reasonable. The question might be asked, why did not some of the local townsmen think of this 3-way solution? In the first place, they were so close to their problem that they failed to take a perspective, bird's-eye view of it, which would have suggested the solution. This, also, is a common mistake, and one that is always avoided by great leaders. In the second place, these townspeople had never before coordinated their efforts or worked as an organized group with the sole purpose in mind of finding a way to get a streetcar line built into town. This, also, is another common error made by men in all walks of life, that of failure to work in unison, in a thorough spirit of cooperation. I, being an outsider, had less difficulty in getting cooperative action than one of their own group might have had. Too often there is a spirit of selfishness in small communities which prompts each individual to think that his ideas should prevail. It is an important part of the leader's responsibility to induce people to subordinate their own ideas and interests for the good of the whole, and this applies to matters of a civic, business, social, political, financial, or industrial nature. Success, no matter what may be one's conception of that term, is nearly always a question of one's ability to get others to subordinate their own individualities and follow a leader. The leader who has the personality and the imagination to induce his followers to accept his plans and carry them out faithfully is always an able leader. The next lesson on imagination will take you still further into the art of tactful leadership. In fact, leadership and imagination are so closely allied and so essential for success that one cannot be successfully applied without the other. Initiative is the moving force that pushes the leader ahead, but imagination is the guiding spirit that tells him which way to go. Imagination enabled the author of this course to analyze the Lumberport Bridge problem, break it up into its 3 component parts, and assemble these parts in a practical working plan. Nearly every problem may be so broken up into parts which are more easily managed as parts than they are when assembled as a whole. Perhaps one of the most important advantages of imagination is that it enables one to separate all problems into their component parts and to reassemble them in more favorable combinations. It has been said that all battles in warfare are won or lost, not on the firing line, after the battle begins, but back of the lines, through the sound strategy, or the lack of it, used by the generals who plan the battles. What is true of warfare is equally true in business, and in most other problems which confront us throughout life. We win or lose according to the nature of the plans we build and carry out, a fact which serves to emphasize the value of the laws of initiative and leadership, imagination, self-confidence, and a definite chief aim. With the intelligent use of these 4 laws, one may build plans, for any purpose whatsoever, which cannot be defeated by any person or group of persons who do not employ or understand these laws. There is no escape from the truth here stated. Organized effort is effort which is directed according to a plan that was conceived with the aid of imagination, guided by a definite chief aim, and given momentum with initiative and self-confidence. These 4 laws blend into one and become a power in the hands of a leader. Without their aid, effective leadership is impossible. You are now ready for the lesson on imagination. Read that lesson with the thought in mind of all that has been here stated, and it will take on a deeper meaning. Intolerance. And after the lesson, visit with the author. If you must give expression to prejudice and hatred and intolerance, do not speak it, but write it. Write it in the sands, near the water's edge. When the dawn of intelligence shall spread over the eastern horizon of human progress, and ignorance and superstition shall have left their last footprints on the sands of time, it will be recorded in the last chapter of the book of man's crimes that his most grievous sin was that of intolerance. The bitterest intolerance grows out of religious, racial, and economic prejudices and differences of opinion. How long, O God, until we poor mortals will understand the folly of trying to destroy one another because we are of different religious beliefs and racial tendencies? Our allotted time on this earth is but a fleeting moment. Like a candle, we are lighted, shine for a moment, and flicker out. Why can we not learn to so live during this brief earthly visit that when the great caravan called death draws up and announces this visit completed, we will be ready to fold our tents and silently follow out into the great unknown without fear and trembling? I am hoping that I will find no Jews or Gentiles, Catholics or Protestants, Germans, Englishmen or Frenchmen when I shall have crossed the bar to the other side. I am hoping that I will find there only human souls, brothers and sisters all, unmarked by race, creed, or color, for I shall want to be done with intolerance so I may rest in peace throughout eternity. You will see at the top of the previous page a picture which describes the futility of combat. The two male deer have engaged in a fight to the finish, each believing that he will be the winner. Off at the side, the female awaits the victor, little dreaming that tomorrow the bones of both combatants will be bleaching in the sun. Poor foolish animals, someone will say. Perhaps, but not very different from the man family. Man engages his brothers in mortal combat because of competition. The three major forms of competition are sex, economic, and religious in nature. 20 years ago, a great educational institution was doing a thriving business and rendering a worthy service to thousands of students. The two owners of the school married two beautiful and talented young women, who were especially accomplished in the art of piano playing. The two wives became involved in an argument as to which one was the more accomplished in this art. The disagreement was taken up by each of the husbands. They became bitter enemies. Now the bones of that once prosperous school lie bleaching in the sun. The two bucks shown in the picture above locked horns over the attention of the doe. The two man bucks locked horns over the selfsame impulse. In one of the great industrial plants, two young foremen locked horns because one received a promotion which the other believed he should have had. For more than 5 years, the silent undertow of hatred and intolerance showed itself. The men under each of the foremen became inoculated with the spirit of dislike which they saw cropping out in their superiors. Slowly, the spirit of retaliation began to spread over the entire plant. The men became divided into little cliques. Production began to fall off. Then came financial difficulty and finally bankruptcy for the company. Now the bones of a once prosperous business lie bleaching in the sun, and the two foremen and several thousand others were compelled to start all over again in another field. Down in the mountains of West Virginia lived two peaceful families of mountain folk, the Hatfields and the McCoys. They had been friendly neighbors for 3 generations. A razorback pig belonging to the McCoy family crawled through the fence into the Hatfield family's cornfield. The Hatfields turned their hound loose on the pig. The McCoys retaliated by killing the dog. Then began a feud that has lasted for 3 generations and cost many lives of the Hatfields and McCoys. In a fashionable suburb of Philadelphia, certain gentlemen of wealth have built their homes. In front of each house the word intolerance is written. One man builds a high steel fence in front of his house. The neighbor next to him, not to be outdone, builds a fence twice as high. Another buys a new motor car, and the man next door goes him one better by purchasing 2 new cars. One remodels his house, adding a colonial-style porch. The man next door adds a new porch and a Spanish-style garage for good measure. The big mansion on top of the hill gives a reception which brings a long line of motor cars filled with people who have nothing in particular in common with the host. Then follows a series of receptions all down the Gold Coast line, each trying to outshine all the others. The Mr., but they don't call him that in fashionable neighborhoods, goes to business in the back seat of a Rolls-Royce that is managed by a chauffeur and a footman. Why does he go to business? To make money, of course. Why does he want more money when he already has millions of dollars? So he can keep on outdoing his wealthy neighbors. Poverty has some advantages. It never drives those who are poverty-stricken to lock horns in the attempt to out-poverty their neighbors. Wherever you see men with their horns locked in conflict, you may trace the cause of the combat to one of the 3 causes of intolerance: religious difference of opinion, economic competition, or sex competition. The next time you observe 2 men engaged in any sort of hostility toward each other, just close your eyes and think for a moment, and you may see them, in their transformed nature, very much resembling the male deer shown in the picture above. Off at one side you may see the object of the combat, a pile of gold, a religious emblem, or a female or females. Remember, the purpose of this essay is to tell some of the truth about human nature, with the object of causing its readers to think. Its writer seeks no glory or praise, and likely he will receive neither in connection with this particular subject. Andrew Carnegie and Henry C. Frick did more than any other two men to establish the steel industry. Both made millions of dollars for themselves. Came the day when economic intolerance sprang up between them. To show his contempt for Frick, Carnegie built a tall skyscraper and named it the Carnegie Building. Frick retaliated by erecting a much taller building, alongside of the Carnegie Building, naming it the Frick Building. These two gentlemen locked horns in a fight to the finish. Carnegie lost his mind, and perhaps more, for all we of this world know. What Frick lost is known only to himself and the keeper of the great records. In memory, their bones lie bleaching in the sun of posterity. The steelmen of today are managing things differently. Instead of locking horns, they now interlock directorates, with the result that each is practically a solidified, strong unit of the whole industry. The steelmen of today understand the difference between the meaning of the words competition and cooperation, a difference which the remainder of us would do well to understand. Also, in England, the men who own the mines and those who run the labor unions locked horns. Had not the cooler heads unlocked those horns, the bones of the British Empire, including both the owners of industry and the labor unions, should soon have lain bleaching in the sun. 1 year of open combat between the unions and the owners of industry in Great Britain would have meant annihilation of the British Empire. The other nations of the world would have grabbed all the economic machinery now controlled by Britain. Let the leaders of American industry and unionism not forget. 15 factors enter into the attainment of success. One of these is tolerance. The other 14 are mentioned many times in this series of lessons. Intolerance binds man's legs with the shackles of ignorance and covers his eyes with the scales of fear and superstition. Intolerance closes the book of knowledge and writes on the cover, "Open not this book again." The last word has been herein written. It is not your duty to be tolerant. It is your privilege. Remember, as you read this article, that sowing the seed of intolerance is the sole and exclusive business of some men. All wars and all strikes and all other forms of human suffering bring profit to some. If this were not true, there would be no wars or strikes or other similar forms of hostility. In the United States today, there is a well-organized system of propaganda, the object of which is to stir up strife and hostility between the owners of industries and those who work in those industries. Take another look at the picture at the beginning of this article and you may see what will happen to all who lock horns in labor disagreements, and remember that it is always the bones of the workers, and not those of the leaders of either the unions or the industries, that lie bleaching in the sun after the fight is over. When you feel yourself preparing to lock horns with someone, remember that it will be more profitable if you lock hands instead. A warm, hearty handshake leaves no bones bleaching in the sun. Love is the only bow on life's dark cloud. It is the morning and the evening star. It shines upon the cradle of the babe and sheds its radiance upon the quiet tomb. It is the mother of art, inspirer of poet, patriot, and philosopher. It is the air and light of every heart, builder of every home, kindler of every fire on every hearth. It was the first to dream of immortality. It fills the world with melody, for music is the voice of love. Love is the magician, the enchanter, that changes worthless things to joy, and makes right royal kings and queens of common clay. It is the perfume of the wondrous flower, the heart, and without that sacred passion, that divine swoon, we are less than beasts, but with it, earth is heaven, and we are God's. Ingersoll. Cultivate love for your fellow man, and you will no longer want to lock horns with him in feudal combat. Love makes every man his brother's keeper. Love, indeed, is light from heaven, a spark of that immortal fire, with angels shared, by Allah given, to lift from earth our low desire. Devotion wafts the mind above, but heaven itself descends in love, a feeling from the Godhead caught, to wean from self each sordid thought, a ray of him who formed the whole, a glory circling round the soul. Byron.